This is episode number 28 with James Newcomb. Coming up.
We were getting notes, and I looked up in the grid, and I realized this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. No matter where it took me, no matter what I did, whether I became famous, whether I or not, this was what I was going to do. This was what I was going to pursue. I was working with, the biggest movie star, and, we slapped each other in the combat class over and over again. It was impressive. Every time I am in a play, at some point, I hear that speech over my shoulder, and I hear, you need to concentrate a little more, you need to buckle down, you need to work a little harder. It's not the end of the world. It's not, It's a play. We're going to tell this story tonight, and we want to tell it the best way that we can. The readiness is all can apply to so much, so many things.
If you're looking for what it takes to be an actor long-term over the course of your life, then you've come to the right place, and you're going to really enjoy this episode. Today's guest started in the theater at a very young age, felt adrift and wasn't exactly sure what he'd do as a young man, and ended up working for years at some of the best theaters in the country. Hey there, this is Nathan Agan, and welcome to the Working Actor's Journey, connecting you with lifelong professionals. Today's guest is Jamie Newcomb, an actor who spent 14 seasons with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, is a founding member of Shakespeare Company, was an inaugural company member of Denver Center Theater, where he remained for 7 seasons, and is a skilled fight choreographer. This podcast is designed to show you how the work is done, what the realities of the working actor life are like, and to share all the different ways actors have come to this career. There is no one path and no single answer. We want to learn from all of those further down the road, to shorten the learning curve and to discover what helps and what doesn't when it comes to having a lifelong career as an actor. Our guest today, Jamie, has been working as an actor almost his entire life. First as a kid with his mom directing local shows in Denver, and then with over 40 years as a professional. In addition to the theaters previously mentioned, he has worked in major roles at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, Chicago Shakespeare, Shakespeare Santa Cruz, the Old Globe, and the Goodman Theater. He has received a Denver Critics Award and a Drama Log Award for his work, as well as the Oxford Society Award for Artistic Excellence for his performance in the title role of Richard III at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Now, with all this Shakespeare talk, if you're looking to develop your skills and stand out with auditions and in shows, our next virtual rehearsal room is in June 2022. Acting the role with Susan Angelo and Beau Foxworth on the Macbeths. Plus, we just added a Q&A evening for those who register with Jessica Kubzanski, Artistic Director of the Theater at Boston Court in Los Angeles. Beau and Susan have played Lord and Lady M multiple times across the country, and they'll work with both actors and audience to dive into these great parts. You'll look at what makes these characters tick, how their relationship informs their choices, and the demise of each of them. As always, the rehearsal room is a supportive, collaborative, and relaxed environment where you can learn the skills to serve you in any medium. Witness how pros actually do the work, and then practice with scenes and monologues. Whether you're serious about acting or just a fan of these characters, don't miss this unique opportunity to explore. Registration is open and seats are limited, so head to workingactorsjourney.com to find out more and sign up. And finally, if you're really enjoying this podcast, you can become a patron. Starting at just $2 per month, get exclusive access to behind-the-scenes and additional content, and be part of taking this show to the next level. And for those who join at the co-star level or higher, just $5 or more per month, you also receive a 10% discount on our workshops and programs, including our current workshop with Susan and Beau. Okay, back to the chat with Jamie. I actually connected with him via past guest Tony Amendola, who recommended Jamie for the workshops we've been doing. When I saw Jamie's resume, I just thought, holy cow, this is such a no-brainer to involve him. He has the kind of career that I know me as a younger actor would really want, and even now, it'd be nice to have played certain roles he's done at some major theaters out there. In 2021, the Goodman released a filmed version of Measure for Measure with Jamie as the Duke. Now, I knew from his resume that he was accomplished, but from the first scene of the play, I was just like, oh, this guy is really good. Just blown away at what he could do. And for those of you who have been lucky to see him either on stage or in some of the workshops we've been doing, including just playing the King of France in King Lear, you know what an amazing actor he is. With the career he's had, I'm very honored to bring him onto the podcast. We had quite the marathon talk, which now seems to be the norm around here, and we dive into a lot of nooks and crannies of his life. It's a great chat. I'm glad he and I did finally cross paths, and he's become a good friend. So here we go with episode number 28. Please enjoy my chat with James Newcomb. How did your self-tape go, by the way?
You know, it was great. I sandwiched it in because, you know, I realized in my text to you that it looked like I was teaching a class on putting makeup on. Yeah. But it was a makeup class for when I was sick.
Oh, okay. I'm like, man, there's nothing this guy can't do.
No, it was a stage fight makeup class. But as it turned out, I went down to teach this class, and the first two people came early, and I had learned it this morning. It was like 3 lines. Mm. So we just shot it in front of a drape in the rehearsal room real quick, and then set it off. So it went fine, you know, how those things are, you know, they know instantaneously if you're what they're looking for. So
is this something out of LA, like network TV or I mean, you know, you don't have to give any details that you don't want to.
Yeah, it's for the Ed Helms sitcom. Yeah, it was for Rutherford Falls. I don't know if you know that show, but it's a little bit like Parks and Recreation.
Oh, okay.
Small town, lots of characters, an officious mayor, you know, that's hapless and he's always putting his foot in it, you know, that kind of thing. So, and
are you focused more on, you know, film and TV, or is it just kind of come in drips and drabs? Like, you know, how often are you doing TV auditions, I guess, or film auditions?
Well, here's the thing, you know, the landscape for film and television, it's an odd sort of paradox in a way, because there's so much more content, because there's so many more platforms than there used to be. There was a time when I was coming up where it was nothing but network television. Right. You know, you had ABC, CBS, and ABC, and all of those, you know, Thursday nights, NBC. You know, must watch, right? You know, all of that, you know, and so there was a limited amount of sort of television work that, you know, so it was a much smaller kind of thing. But what happens is that, you know, that catch-22, because I spent most of my career working in the theater, you know, and a short stint in LA between the Denver Center Theater Company and then going to Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which was I would say about 9 months that I was in LA and without an agent. And I had done a small, low budget horror film in Denver. And I had some tape, you know, some video of me. And I went to one of those places and created a tape, you know, my tape that I could show around. And I did a lot of house sitting while I was there, but I had one disastrous sort of meeting at one agency where I was advised to tell them that what I wanted was to make as much money as possible, you know, and for them and for myself, you know, and that did not go over particularly well.
And it didn't go over well, like with you, or like when you tried to say that.
I felt like it was false, you know. One of the things, the adage, of course, is be yourself. Right. You know, don't try and figure out what it is that the business and whoever it is that's representing the business wants. You know, it's like, oh, I think I should wear these glasses. Sure. Or maybe I should grow a mustache. Or, you know, there are people in LA, particularly in that media of television and film, who have chased their tails for decades, sometimes trying to find that thing. that is going to be commercial and appealing to the business. But ultimately it's inauthentic. And the only thing that really works in the business is authenticity. Ironically, it's something that is so colossally artificial.
Yeah.
But there's something about, those people that have what I guess you could call an it factor, which is there's just something about them. And in film and television, it doesn't really have anything to do with acting. That's not to say that there aren't really good actors in film and television. Of course. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. You can be drop dead gorgeous, and as long as you can walk and chew gum, and you can remember lines and hit a mark, you're probably going to work.
Right.
And, and then again, there are great character actors. There's certain, cadences and qualities that certain actors have, but, Catherine Coulson, for example, who was an actress that was the logged lady and that David Lynch, what was that famous
Twin Peaks?
Lynch? Twin Peaks. Yeah. She was an actress at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Ended up going there. And, she had been a kind of touchstone in her life anyway. She had an affair with Frank Zappa and, I'm not telling stories. These are things that she would talk about, but Catherine was one of those people that you wouldn't say was a dynamic or particularly, unique or what am I trying to say? Facile actress. But when she was on stage, you couldn't take your eyes off her. You just could not watch Catherine. She was just inherently, authentically interesting. And it's one of the reasons why she was the log lady and why there was these things about Catherine. And, Ursula and I talk about this a lot, about teaching acting and is acting teachable and ultimately does it matter? Because then there are some people that just have it and some that don't, when it comes, and particularly with the camera. I went to a party once in New York with Celeste Holm. I happened to go to a party that the Shakespeare Company was trying to raise money. And I went to this party and, I remember Valerie Perrine showed up and it was one of those things where she came in and did this grand entrance and took this mink coat off and looked around and realized there's nobody here that's going to help me at all. No, there aren't enough famous people. It's not, and it was, I remember seeing her face just kind of like fall, and like, how soon can I get out of here? And within about 20 minutes, they were gone. But Celeste Holm was there, and she was great, and she was in the kitchen, and people were talking to her, and she was in All About Eve, arguably one of the greatest films ever made, certainly one of the greatest screenplays ever made, and famous for Marilyn Monroe's first film appearance. And Marilyn Monroe appears where they're all at this party. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. Celeste Holmes, Gary Merrill, I think it was, and Betty Davis, they're all sitting on this staircase. And they're having this conversation. And as the scene goes, Addison DeWitt, who is the critic, the famous critic, who's, comes in with this blonde bombshell on his arm. It's Marilyn Monroe. And Marilyn Monroe had like one or two lines, I can't remember. But as the story goes that Celeste was telling, they're sitting on this staircase, and it's been a long day, and they're trying to shoot this scene, where he comes in with her. And they come in, and she blows the line over and over and over again. And not only does she blow the line, her exchange, but she can't seem to get focused. And they're all, Betty Davis, Celeste, and they're all just rolling their eyes, going like, what are we doing? This is we're wasting our time here, and it's going to be cut. It's going to be cut, or we're going to have to do it again with somebody who can actually do this.
Right.
So they finally get through, and she doesn't. And so Celeste decides to go to the rushes, and she goes in to see, just how bad this actress was going to be, just how bad it was. And her jaw hit the floor when she saw it, because she went, oh my God, the camera loves this woman. It's inexplicable. stories about Gary Cooper and all of the gaffers, all of the crew up on the grid laughing at him during high noon and films, because he's so stiff. And yet on camera, it's magic.
Right.
And that's an intangible.
And so, I mean, looking at the work that you have done on film and TV, TV movies and all, was it a conscious decision on your part to not pursue more of that? Or was that just the way that the cards you were dealt and just the kind of your career?
Yeah. It's pretty much the way that my career went. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I wanted, like any other actor that has ever, worked in the American stage, wanted the greatest and largest audience that they could get. And, when I came up, I was hugely influenced when I was in high school by Peter O'Toole in Beckett. And, those, a lot of those early O'Toole, Lawrence of Arabia.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And, I was just rewatching it the other day, and I mean, like, God, talk about somebody magnetic on screen. And I think later in life he said, and I don't know, whether it started with Arabia or he knew what he was doing even then, but it was like he was always calculated in terms of his physicality on camera. Like he always was very aware of what he wanted to do on camera because he knew it was such a visual medium that he understood that. And he was somebody obviously that came from the stage, but he understood that relationship with the camera.
Yeah. And he was so dynamic, just inherently dynamic in every way. He was larger than life. And so he didn't have to work at making that dynamism and that charisma explode. One of the things about Peter O'Toole was he was so vulnerable. But he could make himself incredibly vulnerable on camera, and, it was just, and it was larger than life,
Well, you mentioned, he was an inspiration as a kid. So I want to go back to the beginning. Did you grow up in Denver? Is that where you started?
Yeah. Yeah. I was born in Denver, and my mother, in my first memories, when she was a theater student at Denver University. And did 2 years there before my dad and her got married. And then she got involved in the junior league, and she would play Raggedy Ann and Rumpelstiltskin. And, I was very, very proud of the fact that my mother was the lead in these shows that all my friends were going to see.
Is this when you were like 5 or something like that, 5 or 6 or
Yeah, about that age. And, I was trying to remember what the first time I performed was, but there was always an element of theatricality. And I think this is probably true. It's true of a lot of kids anyway. I have very early memory of me being in a fireman outfit, a yellow plastic coat with red boots and a red fire hat and a hose, spraying the tree in front of our house, and the water coming down on my head, and having a visceral feeling of being a fireman. Wow. I remember playing war games, like we played World War II, which was not that far away.
Right.
It only maybe 20 years or so. And, I would direct these attacks, I'd direct these scenes, based on films that we had seen, where I would tell them, so we're going to run, and these guys are here, and you fall first, and I don't care if you have to fall in dog doo-doo, you have to go. You have to fall down, and so I directed these things, and they were really, visceral. So I was acting as kids do, dressing up as superheroes and things. But I don't think I ever lost that feeling, I mean, I would say.
Was there anything else that, you said you had that kind of visceral sensation of being a firefighter. Did you imagine yourself ever doing it? Like, were there ever any other ideas of things that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I wanted to be a doctor.
Really?
When I was in 4th grade, I was very, very interested in anatomy. I had an invisible man, and I would read, about, different systems, muscular system, vascular system. I was really, really interested in being a doctor. I love the idea of the microcosm of the body and,
Sure.
stuff like that. But again, I have to say there was also an aspect of playing doctor, of
Right.
wanting to be a
Right.
doctor. You could, I was doing research about, not being a real doctor, but I play one on TV.
Right. I spoke with Robert Pine a couple of years ago for the podcast, and he said that exact thing. Like I think he thought he wanted to be a doctor, and he admitted like he wasn't a very good student. And when he started, I think taking the classes, he was like, "Wait a second, no, this isn't right. This like I'm not supposed to be the actual doctor. I can just go play a doctor. Like that's probably more up my alley." And so, what was your dad do? What did he do for work?
My father worked in real estate. He initially, he was very deft craftsman. So, he started out building houses with my mom's sister's husband, with his brother-in-law.
Okay.
And they built a number of houses along 6th Avenue in Denver and in that area. And then one day, Bernie, my uncle, showed up and said, "Well, Jim, it's all yours. Business is yours." He just gave it to him because he, and gave him a bunch of debt, and all.
Oh,
it was kind of a mess. And because they were co-owners of this construction company, and then Bernie just bailed on him. It was horrible. So, but anyway, my father went into selling houses. And the irony is that his grandfather owned the Newcomb real estate company in Denver, which was the most successful real estate company in the aughts and in the 20s and into the 30s. And for some reason, my great-grandfather thought that there was no future in Denver real estate market. And part of that was the Depression, but I think he was depressed, and there's some scuttlebutt about that he took his own life, although it's not official, but it's kind of a mystery. But he sold the Newcomb real estate company to a guy named Van Schok. And the irony is that when my father left the construction company, he went to work for Van Schok as he sold houses. And then he worked from there, and he got a broker's license, and he ended up working for Equitable, and he managed buildings downtown and was extremely good at that. But he also got involved because my mother was involved in theater. He got involved in the theater like the whole family did as her career sort of rose.
So was he acting, or what was his role in that?
Yeah, he was resistant to it at first because of the ethos of the 50s and 60s of the man providing and the woman being a housekeeper thing, and she had now a second career, and he was supplementing the income quite a bit for the house. But and her star rose. I mean, she was a gifted director. Really, Anyway, he was a great clown. My father was a great clown, physical clown, very funny.
Is that where? I know you. Well, maybe we'll touch on this. I know you played Festi a number of times, and I like. Do you feel, because everybody is kind of like a type at heart? Do you feel like, is your type a clown at heart, or or are you the lover? Are you the fighter?
Yeah, no, I don't really know. I mean, I'm kind of known for my edge.
Okay.
I can be comic. I mean, I was really. A good example is Thersites in Troilus and Cressida.
Yep.
Because that was one of my big triumphs in Ashland. Because Thersites, he's a caustic cynic amongst the Greeks during the Trojan War, and he's been, he's this little homunculus, who's very unattractive, and but is quite witty. And just makes mincemeat of guys like Ajax, who are not very bright, right? And he drives these, and actually in the Iliad, he says one too many vile things to Ajax, and Ajax ends up punching him in the face, and they describe his teeth going out the back of his head. He finally hits him so hard, but in Troilus, he beats him up. And, I just keep making fun of Ajax while he's throwing me around the stage. And there's famous, there's a picture of me in the Arden, I think there was, in one vision where Jamie Peck, who played Ajax, who's giant of a man, is holding me by my ankle upside down. So, in terms, you can argue that Thersites is one of Shakespeare's fools, the darkest of all of his fools.
Yeah.
And so, I've been known as, having an edge. I played Puck 4 times,
that there's a mystery, a mischievous, quality, not necessarily of Jamie, but that's part of your energy. I mean, we all obviously have a lot of facets. I found something that I couldn't believe I found. I'm gonna drop this in the chat so that you can see it. Let me see. I'm curious to hear what you recollect of this.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. That's where did you get that?
Okay, so I got to tell you, this was a total rabbit hole. So and I want to hear the story. I guess this was a production of Babes in Arms, and it said like from July 1965. So you were, I don't know, maybe 10 or something like that. No, when I was going through your film work, in one of the casts, I noticed the name Claudia Newcomb, right? Or is that, yeah. And I was
My
like,
sister, yeah.
Right. And so at the time, I'm just like, that seems like too much of a coincidence. Who is Claudia? And so I just start Googling her, and somehow, like obviously your sister, she's in the back row, like her name was tagged in this, and that came up as a search result. And your name is there as Jamie Newcomb. But yeah, anyone that knows what you look like, as soon as they identify you down in the lower left corner, it's like, oh yeah, that's Jamie. That is totally Jamie right there. And there were some pictures of your mom. There looked like a couple pictures of your mom and your dad together, maybe like at the opening of a show or something like that. Just, stuff from the Denver Post from the 60s. But yeah, I was like, when I saw that, I'm like, holy cow, I wonder if Jamie even knows that this is out there.
I'd love to see that. I'd especially love to see those pictures of my mom and dad.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I'll send you a link. But so, was this, I know you said like the whole family was involved. Was this one of the first things you had done, or was this like you had already been doing it for a long time?
Yeah, I didn't even remember that we were in Babes in Arms, that we did. That looks like it's the basement of St. Thomas Church where my mom ran. She was the director for Saints and Sinners, one of the directors, which was a community theater, and they had a great hall with a stage. And they did some amazing things in there. And one of the first shows I ever did was Our Town, where I played Joel Kroll, that my mom directed. And my dad did a bunch of stuff there. He played Mr. DePina in...
You Can't Take It With You, right?
You Can't Take It With You. And he also was the Dauphin in The Lark that my sister was Joan in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, so that's kind of where it started. And then my mom got hired. Henry Lowenstein came to see a show that she had directed, who was the producer at the Bonfils Theater, which at that time was the biggest theater in Denver that Helen Bonfils had funded, and she was a big angel on Broadway. She owned the Denver Post. She came from a family in Kansas City called Bonfiliosi that was a mafia family, and she changed her names, anglophied it to Bonfils. And, they had a roadhouse at Elitch Gardens in Denver where all the road plays came through. And
okay.
But so my Henry Lowenstein was the producer there, and he hired her to do children's shows. And then she proceeded from there to end up doing main stage shows. And that really launched her kind of professional career.
And so, obviously it sounds like, you and you have a couple of sisters, right? They were all involved. Everybody was involved doing
my oldest
plays.
sister, Glenna, is 4 years older than I am. Yeah.
And are they still like involved in the arts, or do they go and do something else entirely?
My younger sister is working for the Denver Center for the Performing Arts in the education department. She does shows and teaches high school kids through the department there. She also has been a stage manager for them. She also runs the Bobby G Awards, which she adjudicates all of these musicals throughout the region in Colorado. And then they come for a competition in Denver at the Betcher Concert Hall, and winners are chosen. Then they go to New York and they win scholarships. And so she's still involved. My oldest sister worked for Kaiser Permanente in outreach for the community and developed shows for high school kids about sex education and hygiene. And then she did senior issues shows, and then she's worked her way into the political aspect of, liaison from Kaiser Permanente to the representatives in Colorado and Denver,
Oh, okay.
of the community. So,
And
but she also acted, in both of them acted in Denver.
And when did you, really kind of latch on to this idea? Were you still, in middle school or high school that you latched on to the idea of being an actor, pursuing it? Because obviously it sounds like it was, quite a huge part of your world growing up. But when did you kind of see it as like, yes, that's the thing that I want to pursue?
I can't really say it. Like you asked me the question earlier on, did I ever focus on wanting to work in television and film, or did my career just sort of, and I'd have to say that I never consciously made a choice out of high school, because my parents split up when I was a senior in high school. And that was more of a trauma than I thought it was at the time. But I was a little bit adrift, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I went to Adams State College in Alamosa, Colorado for a semester, and did a lot of drugs. I did, my 19th birthday I spent in the Great Sand Dunes on psilocybin. It was an amazing night, just amazing night. But and then I ended up being a maid at a Holiday Inn in Vail, but they happened to shoot a movie of the week there. And Eric Braeden was in it, and Britt Eklund was in it. And this is an apocryphal story about me that, she had this black sable coat that she was like just drop dead knockout,
Yeah.
And one day I was cleaning her condo, and the sable coat was laying on her bed. Well, I had to put it on. So I put it on, and there were these full-length mirrors in the closet, and I'm swishing around, with this coat, playing a rock star. And one of the other maids came in and said, "Take that off. What are you doing?" I said, "Sorry." Put it back on the bed, Well, about 2 days later, the sable coat went missing.
Uh-oh.
And I was one of the suspects.
Yikes.
Because this other maid had seen me wearing
it.
Which wasn't, just circumstantial. So anyway, they brought me in, and they were going to give me a lie detector test. But she came to my rescue. She said it couldn't have been him, because I know when it was stolen, and he was not working at that time. And she kind of
worked out. Yeah,
said it had to be somebody who came into the room, because I had access, I had keys, I had a master key, So
right.
Anyway, as it turns out, she had it stolen as I heard through the grapevine, she had it stolen for insurance purposes.
Yeah,
she was cash poor.
Well, so was it in I mean, I understand the reasons for you kind of being adrift, and I want to touch back on that, but like in high school, were you, just doing all the plays and thinking that this was something you wanted to be? Because, one of the other interesting things, of course, is, what is going on in the country. And I even read that, like, didn't you change high schools because of some riots had broken out at one of the schools or something like that because of the busing issues?
Yeah, in all honesty, when we first moved from Birch Street, which was in Park Hill, which was in the northeast part of Denver near City Park, my oldest sister was in middle school going to Smiley Junior High School. And there were a number of Black families that were starting to move into that area. And there were a number of Black students that were going to school at Smiley.
Sure.
And I'd be lying if my parents moving to the sort of northeast part of Denver wasn't white flight at the time. They were afraid. That's just the truth. I didn't know it at the time. I know it now,
Right.
But that's why we moved where we did. Now, we were right on the line of East High School and George Washington High School. We lived in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. As a matter of fact, I can remember being jealous of the fact that, and also feeling sorry for the majority of the kids that I went to school with having to go to Hebrew school after school. So anyway, so we moved there. And while I was at George Washington University was when forced busing was imposed.
Got it.
And there were a massive number of riots, instability. because it was forced.
Mm-hmm.
And I, so we decided to go to East High School, which was more of an integrated school, which was in South, very near where we moved away from initially. And we stayed in the same house. We just decided they made it possible for us because we were right on the border to go to East High School halfway through my senior year.
So, I mean, were you outside of the decision of which high school you were going to go to and all that kind of stuff, were you aware, or was there a lot of discussion in the house of what was going on, in the country? Because this is 67, 68, 69, somewhere in there?
Yeah. I mean, I can remember my mother saying, after I think it was a interview on one of the news channels, which had to do with the Atlanta boycott, that my mom said, what are they so upset about? What are they so angry about? I mean, there was a massive disconnect. But you have to understand that also my grandfather was a member of the KKK. He was he was a Mason. Yeah. And at the time in the 1920s, I don't know if you know, but the governor was a member of the KKK. There's pictures of the KKK marching down Lincoln Boulevard in front of the Capitol.
Mm.
And just about every major leader in the city was a member.
Jeez, wow.
And my grandfather was as well. And he was a blatant, racially biased individual. Yeah. And, proud to be a part of what we now know we've always known, but has now been, of institutional racism.
Right.
And my mother grew up in that kind of a household.
Yeah.
And my father grew up in a household, not quite as blatant, but definitely racially biased. And so that's what, the world that we grew up in. I like to think of it as benevolent racism, which a smile on the outside, and yet I don't want, I mean, right. my oldest sister is married to a Latinx man, and mm-hmm. my mother still had trouble with, mixed marriages.
Do you think, were you actively, like the younger generation does, were you actively rejecting, or the younger generation often does, were you actively rejecting those ideas of your parents at the time, or was it something that later in life you kind of reflected on and wanted to be more open and embracing of other cultures?
Well, in all honesty, like most people growing up in that period of time, I think I was oblivious to my privilege.
Yeah.
Really? Well, yeah, I certainly paid lip service, and I certainly vocally supported
mm-hmm.
the civil rights movement.
Right.
But I wasn't active, I didn't actually do anything,
No, it's interesting because you reminded me that one of my mother's friends at the height of the Black Lives Matter and the protests in early 2020, one of my mother's friends said, what are they, they just keep going on and on about this. And my mother was like, well, if they don't, nothing's ever going to change, and it's just like, and obviously my mom and her friend were both white, but it's like that kind of idea of like, aren't you done protesting? Like, why do you keep, going on about this? And it's like, well, yeah, because it's not different yet. And so like the story of your mom commenting on it, and it's not that's not the overt racism we think about when we think about racism, but it's like, we need to be open to hearing the other side of the conversation and understanding that, right, things are probably still not okay, just because we don't want to hear it doesn't mean that it's fixed.
No, I mean, my learning curve is still happening. Me too. I have much to learn about others' experience and my own blinders about, racial discrepancy in this country. My education is ongoing. And the more aware I am, the more oblivious I am, the more, the more, I think of, like you look back at your childhood, and how innocent it is. And, there's this underbelly, of things that, but I am an advocate and always have been an advocate for social justice. in every form, in every way. I consider what I ended up doing for a living to be an advocate for social justice, because in every play, there is always a conflict and a moral object lesson at the end of it, and they're all about good and evil. They're all about what's wrong and what's right. And, and you hope the audience comes out of whatever that circumstance is, with a broader sense of the human condition as a whole. And I take great pride in the fact that as a profane clergyman in the theater, which I think of the theater as a profane church, a place of worship, and where we honor the human condition, but it's with all of its warts.
So during that period, you were adrift. How did you, and I'm sure it can, seem a lot simpler looking back, but how did you get yourself back on track, or did you even know what track you were looking for?
I knew I was talented. I knew I could connect with text. I knew, I was in the speech club and competed in speech. And I used to do a piece from Johnny Got His Gun, the horrific piece about him waking up and finding out he doesn't have a face. It's very effective. Right. And, it's one of those things. I had affirmation from other people as I went along, as I sort of dabbled in it, and then I auditioned for Colorado Women's College in 1976, I think it was, 75 maybe. And that was, they had a theater department. They had a really good theater department. At that time, Colorado Women's College was part of the female Ivy League. And they needed guys, in the department.
And for a young guy adrift, a women's college sounds like a great spot to head.
And my older sister had gone to school there. Yeah. So I got in. They accepted me, and I was there for 2 years. And I remember one night in a notes session. And this was my epiphany. This was my answer to the call. This is when I heard the call. I remember it distinctly because we were sitting there on the stage and we were getting notes, and I looked up in the grid, and I was looking up at the grid, and I realized this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. No matter where it took me, no matter what I did, whether I became famous, or not, this was what I was going to do. This was what I was going to pursue. And I can't really say it was because, the camaraderie or, it was a great way to meet girls or, whatever those sort of things. Right. I really, it was actually very quiet and solemn generally. That this was, it was more of like an awareness of the inevitability of it. And from that point on, Mark Cuddy was in that program. Mark Cuddy ended up going back to UMass to get his degree. He started a small storefront theater in Northampton, Massachusetts. Carter was president. He subsidized the arts with the CETA program, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. Mark got a grant. He asked me to come out there in 1977 and do children's theater and then be part of the regular company in their subscription series. Then we had a late night cabaret on Fridays, and it was just an immersion of performance, rehearsing and performing something all the time. And then I met Tina Packer while she came to Smith College to direct a show, and she ended up at that time getting the Mount, from the Ford Foundation, and Mitch Berenson, who Terry Malloy is based on and On the Waterfront. And then she brought me up there and with a bunch of other people, and I got training from B.H. Barry, where I learned a lot of my fight stuff, and Kristen Linklater, and I got kind of professional classical training for the first time.
And did it obviously because it's Shakespeare Company has become such an entity, such a force at the time. Did it just kind of happen, or were these things that because I know at the time when people are starting things, you never know what it's going to become. But yeah, how easy were the conversations? Was it just like, hey, Jamie, we'd love you to, come up and do this? And you were teaching pretty early on, right? Or were you just an acting company member? Not just, but only a company member?
Mark had asked me to come out to
Sure.
Massachusetts, and that I knew that was a fork in the road.
Right.
And I was really grateful. That was one of my happiest times of my life when I went out there. And, so we were, putting together these children's shows, and then we would tour them, and, we'd bring schools into the theater, and then we would be rehearsing the show and then performing a show that night. And, and it just happened, I knew I had heard through the grapevine that Tina Packer from the Royal Shakespeare Company was coming to Smith College to direct School for Wives, something like that. And so, I heard that she was doing a workshop, and I got myself in the workshop at Smith, and I did Hotspur.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
My liege, I did Deny No Prisoners. And I remember I killed it. I really killed it.
Yeah.
And, for what I thought, And at one point during this workshop, or at some point, I remember I pulled Tina aside. We went into this. I said, can I talk to you? She said, yeah. And we went into this like the stairway vestibule sort of place, And I said, I know I've heard you're going to be doing Romeo and Juliet at the theater up at the Mount. And I said, I would love to play Balthazar. Not a big role, but Balthazar is,
sure, yeah.
Kind of pivotal. He's got, and I knew she was impressed that I asked that. And
in terms of like your directness, or strategically which role you were asking for?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she brought me up. And the very first year, they had to postpone it. So she did Midsummer Night's Dream. And I was in A Midsummer Night's Dream at Smith College later that year that a friend of hers directed. And then they cast two other people, Tony Simotis and as Puck. I played Puck in that Smith College production. And Tony had just graduated from NYU, and Kristen had been teaching at NYU. But I ended up being assistant stage manager on that project. But I was also doing The Tempest in Look Park in Northampton. So I was kind of going back and forth, But then she asked me to be a part of the first fall, be part of the people that would, bring the house back, because it was the Fox Hollow School for Girls and it needed a lot of work done to it, and winterize it. And for that, we would get training, And so through that fall, and Richard Dreyfuss came up because he had just done Julius Caesar and he was going to do Iago in Atlanta. And he had just won the Academy Award, and he wanted to be the country's greatest classical actor now, was his next goal. So he got training from Tia. I mean, it was heady stuff. I mean, it was kind of like, it felt like I was on my way, in a way. I was working with, the biggest movie star of the time.
Oh, sure,
And, we slapped each other in the combat class over and over again. It was impressive. And then I stayed on until the winter, and then I went to New York.
Okay, and then the idea or the plan in New York was to, just to start auditioning and figure that out. And did you have anything lined up in terms of like survival work, or what was had you been able to save some money from Shakespeare Company?
Josie Abity, who was at that time she was running the Berkshire Theater Festival. In Stockbridge. She had a connection at the Met, and she got me a job at the Met selling tickets.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was staying with a friend on a couch for a while until I sort of got established there. And I was in New York for a while, and I working at the Met, people would call up and complain about the performance to the box office, and we'd say, well, I'm sorry you didn't like Mr. Domingo, in that role. And they'd get irate, and the joke was, what's your name? What's your name? Well, my name, madam, is Houdini, and at the touch of a button, you'll disappear. Click. Anyway, so I did that, and I knocked around there, and then Mark Cuddy asked me to come up to do a show back at City Studio Theater in Northampton. And it was written by a Russian playwright named Alyosha Kostenko. I think it was called The End of the World or something like that. Anyway, he was the Russian Bob Dylan. He was famous for writing these protest songs. and being underground and, but he wrote this play, which was this Russian fairy tale about a scientist, and to solve the problems of the world. And I was this homunculus that was grown in a boiler that was supposed to save the world. And I shaved my head. And it was a wild, wild piece. And it was actually well received. But it also included us going down to Russian emigre artists and picking up art from New York and bringing it up. But there were unmarked FBI cars monitoring us.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we were definitely on, and CBS covered it. That was kind of a cool thing. And, and then while I was there and we were doing that, an old professor of Marx and mine, Lon Winston, who was the design teacher when we were at Colorado Women's College, and also, involved in, he'd worked with Jerzy Gutowski and Richard Schechner in the performance group and turned me on to that whole, performance art, found space, organic theater scene, which was just, mind blowing. And we had done a trip to New York and met Richard Schechner and seen all this, underground theater that was, really kind of heady stuff right up my alley. That the place I wanted to go, actually. And so Lon had talked the Nevada State Council of the Arts into a $35,000 grant to bring theater to rural Nevada. And Mark and I, the City Studio Theater had imploded, and we loaded up his truck and we drove to Reno, Nevada. And while we were on our way there, we stopped in Denver, and they just happened to be having auditions for the new Denver Center Theater Company that Ed Call was the artistic director for. So Mark went in and auditioned, and I went in and auditioned, and went great. And drove to Reno, and we were in Reno doing Jules Pfeiffer's Hold Me and clowning. We'd go in on a Friday night, and drum up this. We'd juggle in these, Western bars. And they didn't know what the hell was as clowns, and then we would do a children's show on Saturday at the JC's or the Elks Club or, whatever. And that night we'd do Pfeiffer's Hold Me, and then we'd hold workshops on Sunday mornings and leave Sunday night. And Elko, Winnemucca, Eureka, Nevada, these, mining towns, It was wild. Listening to the Blues Brothers.
I'm sure they had no idea what to make of you guys.
No, they really didn't. They really, really didn't. But it was like free money, and we were. But while Mark and I were there doing that, we got the call from the Denver Center, and I got cast in the first company, and Mark was hired as an assistant director.
Now, listening to it, and obviously, we can all do this, kind of look at our past and truncate things, and it just sounds like so many things were lining up for you and hitting. Did it feel that way at the time? Once you had gotten into college and from there, were there things that you were really gunning for that didn't work out and you couldn't were you trying to do the Broadway scene or the off-Broadway scene? And it's not to bring up painful memories, but it's just I'm just kind of curious to hear what was your experience at the time? Because obviously, in a truncated version, it's all man, Jamie's career was firing on all cylinders 24/7.
Well, first of all, I never had the confidence to sort of shoot for the big time.
Yeah.
When I was in New York the first time, I didn't even think about trying to find a way to act in New York. It just was overwhelming to me, just being in New York.
Yeah, it's
and I had come from Shakespeare Company, and I really didn't know how to start to do something like that. Do you just knock on an agent's door? Well, yeah, that's what you do.
Right.
But I was too intimidated. I just wanted to work, but also the timing. I never was there long enough to go, I better do something.
Right. Do you think it was, because obviously you had done so much in Denver growing up that you were, in a very simple way, do you feel like you were a big fish in a small pond and then suddenly you were a small fish in a massive pond?
Yeah. Because, people would talk about me in Northampton, my Puck and other performances, and I was a critic's darling in Northampton, and that was heady. The thing about it is that I kept getting affirmation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, was it the, you mentioned the confidence, was it the fear of rejection in New York? And I know you said you were never there really long enough, but, what, are you able to point at what it was that was holding you back from shooting for something bigger with all that affirmation, with all that, external validation?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably self-confidence more than anything else. Real self-confidence to put yourself out there, and naivete.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, for example, I can remember being at Shakespeare Company. It was when I came back to Shakespeare Company, and Courtney Vance was one of the interns.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And he came up to me and he asked me, so I'm thinking about auditioning for Yale, and NYU and these schools. And I think he specifically said Yale. And he said, I'm thinking about doing that, or should I just like you did, just go from job to job, and get the experience of working.
Sure.
And I think I was all of 26 years old. And I said, go to Yale, try and get into Yale.
Yeah.
Because I knew that Yale was a launching pad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At that time, if you got into the Yale School of Drama, you had cachet. Juilliard of Yale, you had cachet.
Sure.
And I said, well, either one is there, the other one is there for you.
Right. Right.
But Yale, you have a shot at it. So, and he got in. As a matter of fact, his audition was a famous audition because he did Lady Percy.
Oh.
From Henry IV Part 2.
Wow.
And then he did a series of messengers. Shakespeare messengers, and did each one of them differently.
Yeah.
And then he got in, and the rest was history. I have always thought to myself, why didn't I take my own advice? But there was a aspect to my attitude,
mm-hmm.
which was, I really wanted to work, but it was important to me to work, and I wanted to find the next job, and the next job sort of always presented itself, the next thing. Because, after Reno, it was the Denver Center, and I was at the Denver Center for 7 years.
Yeah.
But a lot of the actors that I know that have become well known, it is extremely rare that it just happens. Like Jim Parsons, for example.
Sure.
Jim Parsons, when he was at USD, and I'm not telling anything, really out of school here, but he was quirky.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some concern about what his future was going to be as having a career. Mm-hmm. Apparently this is true of Nicole Kidman as well, that she went to acting school, professional training school in Australia, and the leadership didn't know what they were going to do with her. They were concerned about whether or not she was, because she was just, well, we all know what happened. I mean,
sure. Yeah.
There was this, Big Bang Theory that came along. He auditioned for it. He delivered.
Right.
Throughout all of those processes, So it wasn't just that, he was just right for the part, which he was, but he also was able to do it. Mm-hmm. Because it's, so much of this business is luck. But when the opportunity arises, the readiness is all. Being prepared and being able to deliver, is the thing. So, but in that case where, the perfect role came along for the perfect actor that led to a career that is a very high profile career, that doesn't happen very often. Yeah. But the ones that I know that have, arced their way, have had a keen sense of who they are, what it is that they project, what that thing is, and have known when to, how to work it.
Yeah. Well, did you ever feel like there was a part that just, it was that kind of perfect marriage in terms of where you were in your life and your understanding of yourself and the character, and it it was just the right marriage, and whatever level of acclaim or external success it had, like that, it just felt like that whether it led to fame and fortune is somewhat irrelevant, but like do you feel like that happened, and did it happen more than once?
It happened in a few cases. And Orphans at the Denver Center, that was a phenomenal production. Jamie Horton, Jim Lawless, and James Newcomb. And I played Treat. And I remember a number of people from New York came and saw it and said, it's, too bad this isn't the production that was done in New York. Not to take anything away from that original Steppenwolf thing, but I knew we were, that was something special. I also knew that not so much the production, but Thersites was a definitive take on that. And then Richard III at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. That was a marriage of timing of where I was in my craft, where I was in my career, my understanding about that role, the gift that Libby gave me and being able to do the Henry Sixes that led to doing Richard III. So I had the progression and a clear sense of what I felt Richard's psychological, emotional progression was that I could interpret and play.
Yeah, with those plays, did you know when they cast Henry VI, what was it, the season before, did you know they were like, because I think I read like not many of the people from Henry VI ended up in the Richard III, except for maybe a couple people. So did you have any say in that, or did you know, how far in advance did you know you were going to be able to play the whole thing out?
Well, I knew in 2003, at the end of the season in 2003, Libby cast me to do the Henry Sixes in 2004 and then Richard in 2005.
Okay,
I knew I was going to continue it straight through.
Got it.
For 2 seasons.
Yeah.
We did the Henry Sixes outdoors in the Elizabethan, and then the Richard was done in the Bomer. And they weren't productions that were connected, stylistically. We didn't.
Right.
We did the first outdoors was more traditional of the period, and there was more modern version done in the Bomer that we did. But in both cases, I had crutches.
So were you then doing Denver Center and Shakespeare Company kind of concurrently? Were you going back and forth, or what was the time like?
No, the first, I came to the Denver Center when it first started in 1979, and that was a big deal, man. I mean, at that time, Don Sewell was the only American to ever sit on the board of the Royal Shakespeare Company and owned the sole rights to The Sound of Music on Sleuth and a number of other. He was Helen Bonfey's entertainment lawyer. Yeah, and he also represented like Tallulah Bankhead and a bunch of people. He was a remarkable. He knew where a lot of skeletons were buried. But they had more money than God. It seemed like at the beginning of that theater, and we opened the theater on we did Caucasian Chalk Circle, which Ed had directed at the Guthrie, which put regional theater on the map. It was the first production that drew national attention. Tandy Cronin was in it, Hume Cronin was in it, and it was a Jessica Tandy was in it, and Hume Cronin. And it was a massive hit. And so Ed wanted to open the theater with that production. And he had Tandy Cronin, Jessica's and Hume Cronin's daughter, and Tyne Daly was Groucho. We opened 3 plays at the Denver Center, and the openings were New Year's Eve night, New Year's Day, and then the 2nd of January. And so, but we did have a preview on Christmas night. And a lot of the homeless came in and because it was free,
got warm.
They offered it for free, and they got warm and slept in the seats, So, and the opening of Learned Ladies, which was on New Year's Day, was also a celebration of Henry Fonda, his being awarded the ANTA Award, the American National Theater Award.
Oh, okay.
And so in the audience on opening night was Henry Fonda and Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
Wow.
And Lynn Fontaine and Lucille Ball and Marvin Davis.
Wow.
It was quite an event, and
And
I
were you
played.
in? Sorry, yeah, you were in all the shows, or just a couple of
Yeah,
them?
I was in two of them. I was in Caucasian Chalk Circle and also in Learned Ladies, and played Lapin, who is the servant, the silent servant. I think I had 2 or 3 lines, but I had a bit where I was standing in the back while the scene was going on, but people kept putting books in my,
Yeah.
I carried in books, and I needed to be still because, told me to, as I remember. Anyway, they kept putting books in my hands. And I did this bit where my legs slowly, from the weight of the book, started to spread.
Yep.
So I just sank slowly, but I did it so imperceptibly because I didn't want to upstage anybody.
Right.
But then there's a reference that somebody did at the end of the scene, and my legs are splayed, and suddenly the audience sees what's happened. And so it had to be really surreptitious.
Yeah.
And timed so that when they did the reference, the audience is in. I got a big laugh, and Lucille Ball told me afterwards, "You were funny. You were
That's
funny."
good. That's good.
And that was high praise. Yeah.
And I mean, obviously that's a different kind of physicality, but I know you've done a lot of fight choreography in your career. Where did that start at Denver Center? Like just you getting more interested? I mean, because I'm sure it was always part of things you were doing, but in terms of your pursuit of that work or learning of how to choreograph.
Yeah, I mean, movement. I was a gymnast when I was in high school, and an athlete. I've played a lot of tennis tournaments. And so I was coordinated, and and when I was at Shakespeare Company, actually, B.H. Barry came up to do some workshops with the company and with us, and he did the fights for those first shows. And, he kind of took me under his wing because he saw that I, had an alacrity for it, and that I was very, very good at it, good at with swords. And we did this thing up there. Oh, it was for the community and a fundraiser for Shakespeare Company. Anyway, there were a bunch of fights all over the grounds, and people would wander the grounds and they'd see all these elaborate, sword fights and people, hand-to-hand things. And it was really fun. But anyway, so he took me under his wing, and I ended up assisting him at workshops at Yale and Columbia and NYU. And, I became kind of one of his, protege.
Sure.
Kind of things. And so I picked up a lot from him. And Shakespeare Company would oftentimes use me as a go-to secondary fight director for their children's show, for their high school show, the touring show, and that kind of stuff. And then it just grew from there. I went back to the Denver Center, and I was choreographing, directing fights there. And J. Stephen White, who is a very well-known fight director in New York, gave me some more detailed point work with rapiers.
Okay.
And court swords. And so I got, a lot from him. And then I proceeded, I directed fights for Idaho Shakespeare Festival and for the Denver Center. And then when I went to Oregon Shakespeare Festival, I became the sort of in-house resident fight director and did the fights for all the shows that were there. So it just became a thing. And then I directed a number of fights here in San Diego at La Jolla Playhouse and the Globe.
And so, a couple of questions. Did you feel like at the time, was it just a very small network? Is that how you kind of got connected with all these different regional jobs, or were you pursuing them? Were you hearing things?
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution of fight directing in general. In the 19th century, all of the fights were codified, and you just did the Hamlet Laertes fight, and it was all marked out usually in the script, and it was the fight that everybody did. You just did that fight, and then in film there became the need for for that, but on stage, people just kind of made it up, and they would bring in a fencing master or something, but the person who kind of put it really on the map in the modern era was William Hobbs, who did the fights for Romeo and Juliet. Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet,
Oh, okay.
and Three Musketeers, and Rob Roy, and a number of others. But it was a kind of naturalistic fighting, that hadn't really been done before. And it kind of set a tone, Now, what happened in the 70s is, actually David Boucher, who's a very well-known fight director on the West Coast, and B.H. Barry, who was a very well-known fight director, on the East Coast. They had known each other in England. David's American, but he was studying in England, and it became this sort of like Crips and the Bloods kind of thing.
Okay.
Where BH took the East Coast and David went to the West Coast and was based in Seattle. But there was a number of like Eric Fredrickson and fight directors that were on the West Coast. And the thing that happened on the West Coast is that they got together and they created the American Society of Fight Directors.
Oh, okay.
ACFD, ASFD.
You'll get it right one of these times.
But anyway, and what they ended up doing is they started in Las Vegas and they did a number of workshops and they created a training, to certify actors, and they were the masters. And there were various levels of accomplishment, and then, so there were a number of people that were getting certified, but BH just took people under his wing and so I was one of those people that ended up, directing fights and teaching. I've taught at UCSD now for 20 years, and I taught at the National Theater Conservatory before that. I never joined the society because I was already doing it, and it was one of those things you could say might be pride, but there wasn't discussion I had with David Boucher, and he wanted me to go through a whole rigmarole of qualification, and I felt that I had already done that, and my safety record and the quality of the fights that I've done sort of speak for themselves.
Yeah.
So so there's that sort of impasse, I guess, or oddness, about now it's been so long. Most people are getting certified. Most people are and theaters want to hire fight directors that are members of the society. I still do it, and I just refute, but
you predate the society in some regards,
I did before it even started. I was already directed,
right. And I mean, in addition to maybe the allure of the different weapons and the choreography, was there something about what the fight represented, or like how you saw fight choreography beyond just, oh, well, you'll punch here, or kick here, or, use your sword this way here? That
it's one of the foundational principles of when I'm teaching the graduate students at UCSD, is that one of the things that you see oftentimes in productions is generic fight choreography. Generic fight that fill in the blank.
Sure.
And one of the things is that when violence happens on stage, when you get to a point where violence, it's usually more often than not, like it is with countries when they go to war, they can no longer talk to each other.
Right.
Words aren't going to do it, And there are dynamics of somebody who is provoked into a violent act, that can be impulsive. And sometimes it's thought through. It's intended. So, depending on the physicality of the actors and depending on the circumstances of the situation in the play, you want to create something that's realistic. I mean, I've seen things where people hit somebody with a backhand to the face, and then that person gets up and has a monologue. Well, You wouldn't be able to do that.
Right. Sure.
I mean, it says he hits him, okay, but if you do that particular hit, it's out of context because that's about as brutal a punch as you can give as a full backhand smack to the face.
Right.
And the same thing with, and also the care that, because you don't know how violence is acted out on any individual in their life. And it is presumptuous to assume that thing for somebody to do.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes the fight bit of violence is, I think, given short shrift, but if you have like the strangling of Desdemona,
Right.
You know, you have to come up with a reason why. Well, he strangles her and then she doesn't die. And then he puts the pillow on her and suffocates her
Right.
to kill her. I've always thought he broke her neck, you know, and that's one of the reasons why she can't talk to Amelia, because she's lying there paralyzed.
Wow.
But knows that she's, you know, there's the possibility of here, you know, it's just trying to find what specifically is happening.
Yeah.
In this moment, and how can this violent moment best serve the overall narrative,
Right.
and
Right.
be effective, you know?
Right. That it's the continuation of the story just through different means, not just not just let's stop and have a fight and then we'll get back to the story. Like it would be similar to thinking that in a musical, well, the song is lifted up. No, the song is part of the story. It's there to serve a need narratively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, you want it to have some sense of authenticity, you know? I mean,
right.
And that requires time and care and expertise and craft, you know?
Yeah.
And you have to, you know, sometimes, you know, let's say, I mean, I choreographed a Macbeth where the Macduff was a very, very good fighter and the Mackers was not. You know, and you hope you have at least one, because you can usually make that other person who's weaker look good with one that is that moves well and is a good fighter. But,
Well, I wanted to jump ahead a little bit because there's so much stuff we can cover in your career, which is great. But I heard a story in the early '80s, so we're kind of on track for where we are, that you saw the production of Henry V in New York with Kevin Kline, and the performance of Tony Heald as Fluellen really stuck with you. Yeah. And what's interesting also is that I just spoke with Elizabeth Dennehy, and she was in that production. She was like a lady in waiting or something.
I think we talked about that years ago.
Yeah,
actually, yeah. Oh,
and
wow, wow.
So I know, like I had heard that that performance by Tony really stuck with you, and you ended up playing that part at OSF. So I was curious, what made you want to tackle the role based on what you were seeing? And
actually, I didn't play Fluellen at OSF. I played it at Chicago Shakespeare.
Oh, Chicago Shakespeare. Sorry.
Right.
So,
that's right.
I mean, Tony is no slouch himself. So it's not like you're probably seeing something going, oh, I could do this so much better. But, what was it that, inherent in the character that made you want to tackle that one?
Well, I mean, his loyalty, his understanding of history, of the rules of war, and behavior, and how things should be, how a soldier should behave, devotion to Henry, his reaction to the killing of the boys, as that's just not done, his ethics.
Yeah. So was it somebody that like kind of just immediately resonated with you, or you saw something that was kind of a challenge, a hill you wanted to climb?
I just loved the role, and I loved the role because of Tony.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time I had seen Henry V.
And I mean,
and his relationship with Kevin Kline.
Yeah.
And particularly that scene after the battle, where they bond so profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautifully done in the Brana film as well, with Ian Holm, who is another actor that I've always identified with.
Yeah.
I remember telling Libby I wanted to be her Ian Holm.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, well, yeah, he's done a lot of fantastic roles, and always kind of puts his stamp on things too. And I know, you obviously overlapped with Tony Heald at OSF, for a number of seasons. And I actually have seen you both play the Duke in Measure for Measure. I saw your filmed version, but I saw Tony's in person. Do you feel like he was one of the actors or one of the many that, I guess the question is, are there things that you feel like you learned from Tony from working with him or observing him many years, or were there other actors there that you were just like, I'm really glad I got a chance to watch this person or work with this person because it helped me develop this tool, or, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, Tony's intensity is always inspiring.
Oh, really?
I mean, his absolute commitment and investment, whatever role he's playing, is something that I have always wanted. I always admire because I feel the same way, about when you take on a role that you commit to that. You have a responsibility to the author and to all those who have gone before to give it your best, and keep looking. I mean, that's the other thing is that the work is never done. It's not really, it's always revealing itself. That was one of the glorious things about Ashland anyway, about long runs.
Sure.
Is that you could find things within the framework of what had been, directed, but it was always revealing itself. And that's also one of the glories, particularly about Shakespeare, is that there's always something else to find. There's always something else to be revealed. Rex Raybould is another one, who was an actor when I first came to Ashland, and just, and everything he did had such integrity. So yeah, but I mean, I told Tony when he first showed up in Ashland, when he came, before he was in the company one night, I can't remember what the show was, but he was waiting to say hi to everybody. I think he knew some people, and I said, you were a seminal performance in my life. That Llewellyn has stuck with me all my life, and I just thought that. It was just sensational, and I hope I get the chance to do it, and then later on I did. But
did over the years, did he ever open up about that performance, from the other side of it, of working on it? I'm just curious if you ever heard his experience.
No, it didn't. One of the things about, I was in and out of Ashland.
Oh, okay.
Because it was, I think shortly after that I went to San Diego, and I was there for a year and a half, and then I came back to the company. It was at least 2 years that I was in San Diego before I came back to the company. And Tony would be gone, and then he'd come in and I'd go, or, so we were, so I didn't get to hang out with him that much. But one of the things he used to do at his house was do readings on Monday nights.
Oh, cool.
Of Shakespeare plays, cold readings of, like Love's Labour's Lost or All's Well That Is Well. And they were always really fun,
I'm sure. Yeah. What did you feel like you discovered playing Llewellyn those many years later, actually getting to inhabit the person? Like, did it meet the, I guess, observational expectations you had, or were there even, you just talked about you can continue to discover things. So were there certain things that surprised you about the part, actually getting to play it?
I can't say that there were, there were some cuts that I wished we hadn't cut. There's a scene with Poins and Leeks, where, Poins made fun of him, and, and Leeks being the vegetable,
right, of course,
whales, and so, and it's a very funny scene, and he really presses Poins down.
Yeah, where he makes him eat the leek at the end.
Exactly.
And you guys cut that?
Exactly. Yeah.
We that's
cut
horrible.
That because the director wanted to, tighten things up. And,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
And that was unfortunate. We had a very exuberant Henry.
Okay.
And one of the things about the dynamic at the end of the battle is that if he's too exuberant, then you don't get Llewellyn's that sort of bond of like what they've been through, which is so beautifully done with Rana and Ian Holm, and we kind of got it, but it's like I wasn't disappointed playing it because I felt like it was right in my wheelhouse at the time, particularly, and I was so happy to be playing it, And, I have some Welsh background in my lineage a little bit. And I don't know, it just was, I just knew who that guy was. I just knew, that there's no gray. It's black and white. It's this and that.
Yep.
It's not, it's the world in the military is precise,
right.
And, do you know that, Llewellyn is based on a actual historical character named Owen Tudor, they believe.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And Owen Tudor was a Welshman who ended up marrying Catherine after Henry V died, and was the original line of the sire of the Tudor line.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Now I got my Jeopardy answer, my final Jeopardy answer ready
So
to go.
there's a nobility to it. I mean, they haven't definitively.
Yeah, of course.
But they're, but Owen Tudor, was at the Battle of Agincourt. He was with Henry. He was a dear friend of his. He was a commoner who was then elevated when he married Catherine. But anyway, he's Prince of Wales thing. Anyway,
oh, okay, that line comes, yeah. And so, during the 80s, you're doing Denver Center Theater, you were there for a number of years. Were you also, auditioning for other theaters? Were you going back to New York to occasionally do stuff? Like did you have kind of a plan or goal of where you wanted to end up by? Yeah, I mean, I know very few people are like, okay, by 1990, I want to be here. But I mean, did you know where you were going, or were you just following the work?
Just following the work for the most part. I mean, I remember, Tina called up and I got an offer from Shakespeare Company after 1981 when I did Finch and How to Succeed in Business, which was my big role. I came in playing a prop man in Caucasian Chalk Circle in Le Pen, and then by the spring of 1981, I'd gotten the part of Finch in How to Succeed in Business.
Were you very comfortable with musical theater up to that point, or was that a departure for you?
I mean, I had done some. I had sung, but this was by far, I did like Little Chap and How to Stop the World I Want to Get Off, or Roy the Grease Paints, and some musicals, when I like in Gypsy and the stuff when I was growing up. But
sure,
this was the first lead of a musical that I had ever done. But right while I was doing that, I got offered, went back to Shakespeare Company, and I did a season with Shakespeare Company. I got married that September to my first wife. Then came back to the Denver Center for another season. That's where I met Merce Rule. And
so you were just kind of bouncing back and forth.
So I was kind of bouncing back and forth from, Shakespeare Company for those couple of years.
When you made the decision, I guess I should ask it, did you make the decision to leave Denver Center Theater? Was that a conscious decision to do something different, or did you just not get any parts? I mean,
yeah. I played Leslie in The Hostage that Donovan Marley directed, and that was the year that Ed Cole stepped down. And I didn't, unbeknownst to anybody, Donovan Marley eventually was named artistic director, but Ed Cole had brought him in to direct The Hostage.
Got it.
And direct an agent from New York, Louis Ambrosio. He came out to Denver and he saw it and he was impressed. And he said, when you come to New York, let me know. If you come to New York, let me know.
Yeah.
So at the end of the following season, I was playing Tranio in Timmy the Shrew, and my wife and I, we moved to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so he represented me. And so that was sort of like my choice to go to New York and see what happened, because I had representation, and for the first time.
Sure.
I really had somebody representing me. And so I went and I got a job fall at Syracuse Stage in Shadow of a Gunman, like Tommy Owens.
Was he representing you across the board or just for theater?
Yeah, across the board.
Okay.
Yeah. It became Ambrosio Mortimer. Meg Mortimer became the other
half of that, or team,
sort of owner of that. And then, unfortunately, it turned out that Louis was stealing money from the company, and it was Meg ran it for a little while on her own, but it kind of went south.
Oy.
And but went out on auditions there. I remember him telling me, for the first month you should be having like 1 or 2 auditions. By the third month you should be going out, 4 or 5 times a week, or 12 times a month or something like that. And then, and that didn't happen. I sort of, and these are in the days when you had answering services and you'd call in to get your messages, and, there wasn't getting auditions. And I suppose I could have been more proactive about that, but, I didn't. But here's the thing. This was the lesson that I taught myself, is I had an offer to go to Shakespeare Company to do Midsummer Night's Dream to play Lysander.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned them down to stay in New York. And it was going to be for the summer. And it ended up that the public brought it in and they ran it in Prospect Park. And I said no. I asked for more money and they wouldn't meet it. And so I said, no, I'm going to turn it down. And then I didn't work for about 9 months.
Mm.
And the lesson that has been my thing is don't say no. And, other people argue this, but don't say no unless you have something else. I mean, like if you can get them to give you a better offer, and then, then you take it and you let the other one go. But to say no and not work seemed to make no sense. Now, I know people that have said saying no is one of the more powerful things you can do because it makes you more attractive. But I was saying no to a company that I'd already worked with. Right. It's not like, anyways.
And so yeah, I mean, so were you just doing odd jobs to make ends meet during that time?
I worked at Curtain Up, a restaurant, as you do.
Oh, okay.
In the base of the Manhattan Plaza on 9th Avenue and 43rd Street.
Okay. And occasional is probably a way that we can describe your film career, is that there are occasional projects once a decade. So you're due for another one. But I mean, was that an intentional decision? Did you decide you just wanted to focus more on theater, or, because at that time, a lot of it is you need to be in New York or LA, or probably even more so LA. And was that just not something you wanted to do?
Well, interestingly enough, when I went back from New York, I got offered a season. Donovan Marley offered me a season, and I went back to the Denver Center. Mm-hmm. And then I worked there I did a couple of seasons with Donovan. And then, I didn't get a season from them, and I was still in Denver, but I auditioned for this movie that was produced by Focus Features at the time. And it was a horror movie. It was a low-budget horror movie that ultimately we found out was financed by the mob. It was a money laundering scheme to do films for VHS release in foreign countries. Predominantly.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's called Lone Wolf. Actually, you can find it on YouTube. There's, I think, a couple of overdubbed versions. There's an English version. There's an Italian version. I think there's a Romanian. Anyway, and I had the lead. I had the I was the frustrated, brooding, hopeful rock and roll star that everybody thinks is the werewolf, but turns out not to be. And it actually ends up being the computer. So it's hilarious. It really is. John Callis directed it. We shot it in about 3 weeks, but it was an interesting process because I hadn't done a film,
Sure.
And I was doing a play, Taking Steps, in Arizona when they did the big opening, party. And but the execs from Focus Features were impressed by what I did. Mm-hmm. And that was cool to hear. So when I finished that gig in Arizona, I decided to go to LA because I didn't have anything and didn't know what else. So I went to LA and I went into Focus Features to meet with these people. Mm-hmm. Now in the film, I have really long black hair, which had grown over the course of, a while. And it was great, so I go, but when I did Taking Steps in Arizona, I had to get a cut and cut pretty short. So this was a classic kind of LA story, I think, about the lack of imagination.
Yeah. Who are you?
I walked in and they went, what happened to your hair? Well, I did a show. I had to cut it. Oh, wow. It's a different look. It's a really different look, and I was like, oh, okay. So it was my hair really you were impressed with, not what I did, but so I knocked around LA for about 9 months, and I put a video together and I ended up doing the West Coast premiere of The Grace of Mary Travers in Santa Monica, Harriet Harris, and who was just fabulous to work with. And, and Ursula, my wife now, she was the coach. She was the dialect coach for that show. And that was the first time we worked together.
Cool.
So anyway, and one day I was living in an apartment that was about the size of a parking space in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And actually right across the street from where Jane Fonda had a house when she was very young in the 60s, because it was a block away from the beach, which was very cool. But the toilet didn't work, and there was all this, stuff. Anyway, but going to a cutout piece of foam that was my bed.
Oh, jeez.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I got a call. The only thing
I
I had was a phone. I had I had a phone in there, and I got a call because I had done Romeo and Juliet in 1987 in Idaho, and Pat Patton had come to see it and was impressed. And there was a lot of talk about me going to Ashland, and I was sure that I was going to go to Ashland the summer that I ended up being in L.A. And then I got a notice that I wasn't hired, so that came as a shock. But then Dennis Bigelow gave me a call because he was the artistic director at the new offshoot from OSF in Portland, Oregon, Portland Center Stage, which is what it is now. But it was OSF Portland, and he wanted me, because he had been the production stage manager in Denver. He wanted me to come up to the Miser and Pericles, which was then going to go, Pericles would go down to Ashland and run in the summer season in the Bone.
And is that how you got more on the radar of the OSF folks, through that production?
Well, I knew I was on the radar, and it actually came as a shock that I didn't get hired.
Oh, okay.
Because Jerry Turner had seen me in Orphans at the Denver Center. And was really impressed. And, so there was, and I had a phone conversation with him, and there were people actually saying, "Oh, you're going to love Ashland. I hear you're going there. I hear you're going to be cast." And, so it was in the ether, and then suddenly, no, not that year, but the next year they did. So.
And so, I mean, like, at the time, and maybe over the years, and certainly as you've seen, companies come and go and actors come and go, like, were you able to distance yourself from those feelings of personal rejection that sometimes come up, or because I think at a certain point you can have perspective of like, oh, well, just based on the company they have and what they're trying to do, you just didn't fit in this way. Did you have that perspective at the time, or how did you kind of recover from that?
I never really sweated it much. I never really, I just figured the next thing would come.
Right. Well, I mean, I would guess, based on how much you did as a kid with your mom, that it was just like, yeah, okay, here's this project, or here's the next project. Like, it's, maybe, I don't know if you ever saw her sweat things in terms of, when's the next project going to come. But yeah, it just seemed like, I guess there could be a sense where it was just, there wasn't as much maybe pressure on it because you did it so often. I don't know. Does that make sense?
The next job just always came along, and even in the lean times, I mean, I recently heard somebody use this analogy of Spider-Man in your career, that you go from building to building using your web, but there's hang time between the buildings.
Sure.
And sometimes that hang time is longer than it is at other times.
Right.
Which I thought was a good analogy for how a career works,
Yeah.
Now, I knew somebody that went to the University of Miami, which is where Faye Dunaway went, and was in her class, I think. And they were at a party, and they were talking about what their careers were going to be, or where they were, where do you see yourself in 10 years kind of thing, now that they were all graduating from the theater school there. Mm-hmm. And it got around to Faye Dunaway, and there was a pause, and she said, so the apocryphal story goes, "I will do anything to be a star." And, I think that there's a mentality like that, that it doesn't, I'm not, not Faye Dunaway, Katharine Hepburn once went out to the group theater, Harold Clurman's group, and
sure, yeah,
all of that, and it was at the very beginning, and he gave this speech about, what it is to be an ensemble, and, that we all work together to create great theater, and, and this was at a time when socialism was, very prevalent, in terms of political perspective. in the early 30s. And it came around to Katharine Hepburn, and she said, I don't want no part of this. I'm going to be a star. And she left. And so there's kind of, I think there is a certain sensibility. Some stars are made, some stars are born, they're just inherently, but just target. They're not interested in doing that. They just want to be, a star. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have liked all of that, but it clearly wasn't a priority.
Right. That those things like collaboration and ensemble appeal to you.
It did. I always liked the idea that we were all working. I mean, hopefully we're all oaring together to achieve a goal. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. I have very little patience for divas, and people that need a great deal of attention and a lot of maintenance, I mean, I've always felt like just cowboy up, let's all make this happen. Let's all work together to make this happen. And, I feel strongly about that,
Yeah. Did you ever work, during your professional career with your mom on shows?
One time.
Really?
One time.
Okay. Just once?
I did. Yeah, just once, because I left, when I was in my, I guess it was, my early 20s, I left, and I occasionally came through town, and I would be working in town, but I'd be working at the Denver Center.
Okay.
So I wasn't available to work with my mom. But one year when I was working in Ashland, she was directing The Secret Gardaí at the Arvada Center. And it was in that interim period between closing in Ashland and starting up in January.
Oh,
so
okay.
it fit
Yeah.
perfectly. And I remember sending a tape, and I played Dickon. It was probably a little old for Dickon, but I've always had a youthful
energy
look.
and exuberance.
At least I did. And, so I went out there, and my older sister was in it, and I stayed with my older sister. And that was the one time that I worked with my mom in an equity show, in a professional show. And, I could tell that she was nervous about it. And I was,
directing her kids. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
or specifically you.
Specifically me. Because she had worked with my younger sisters a lot. She had directed them in a lot of shows. I mean, quite a few. Because they stayed in Denver, and they had done, but not me. And I had done, I'd worked at a lot of theaters, and and so she was, she was very, was very careful. We were, with each other, and, and she was more careful with me than she ordinarily was with anybody. She just, because she could be pretty, definitive about what she wanted and what people needed to do. But I will always be grateful that I did that. And, my mom, when she directed, it was you could guarantee, you could bet the house on, at some point after either a dress rehearsal or a preview, she would give the do better speech.
Okay.
You got to buckle down. You got to, everybody has to, and it was a strong pep talk about needing to work harder and be more focused and more concentrated. And I have to say that I'd heard that speech a few times, when she was directing shows and teaching drama in our basement. And I knew she did it for almost every show she ever directed. Every time I am in a play, at some point, I hear that speech over my shoulder. And I hear, you need to concentrate a little more. You need to buckle down. You need to, work a little harder.
And do you feel like you have a good gauge for yourself of when you're, delivering the goods, so to speak? Like, okay, are you pretty good at staying out of your own way, but then also being honest with yourself in terms of when you're doing good work?
Well, I know when it's good.
Yeah.
I know when it's good. I know when and there have been a few roles and a few productions where it just was like in the pocket. and it was in the
Yeah.
pocket from the beginning. I just knew that this was going to, The other thing is, I suppose it's a self-protective psychological thing that I make less of it. I try and not get caught up in the anxiety of like we're getting to performance. It's not to say that I don't get nervous or if I don't feel that tension.
Sure, of course.
But I remind myself it's a play. Like I'd stand in the lobby of the Shakespeare Santa Cruz, which is out on Navy Pier, and you look out back towards Chicago.
Oh, it was Shakespeare Chicago, right? Yeah.
That incredible skyline.
Yep.
And realize, a drop in the water of the population of Chicago is coming to see this tonight.
Right.
It is going to be at the opening tonight. It's not that important. I mean, it is, but it's just a kind of thing where to try and put it in perspective, because it's easy to make it like this is, and it is. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's a way of giving yourself like it's not the end of the world. It's not. Right. It's a play. We're going to tell this story tonight, and we want to tell it the best way that we can.
Right.
On the same. I've known oftentimes this is bad. This is not good. This
like
is
for
not,
your personal work.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what this is, but this ain't working, And
like, did you finish runs that way? Like you just never were able to crack it?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, depending on casting and because it's rotating rep, you get cast in a role you're just wrong for.
Okay. Yeah.
You're just not probably the right best choice. You're a choice,
Yeah.
And so, you give it your best shot, but it's hard not to know that. That's a sort of thing like, boy, this is not a good fit. This really isn't a good fit, but I'm,
I gotta find some way through this. Yeah.
Yeah, and you do, I mean, it's usually a smaller part, so it's not as big a demand, and certainly wasn't Ashland, and, the hard thing in Ashland, and anybody who's ever been in Ashland will tell you this, is when well, first of all, you only get 2 previews in Ashland, which was just nonsense, because that's actually a third of the process.
Right.
So, and then it's locked in. And it's very hard, it does, stretch a little bit. Good stage managers up there won't keep a lock on it. They'll understand where things need to expand and where they don't,
Yep.
But when you're in a show, for example, that opens in late February in the Bomer and runs until the second week or through the first week or almost to the end of October, and it's not good. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's a hard one.
Yeah. I mean, as a young actor, I remember Ashland represented kind of a pinnacle of getting cast there. And I auditioned in LA a couple times, I think. As far as I know, never even got close. There was one guy I know who did work, I think, at least one season there, a younger actor in the company. But I think it was like a few years later that I thought about the process, and especially as a young actor, well, what would I be playing up there? I'm not going to be cast as Hamlet or another lead role like my first season, especially as an unknown actor. And I think I realized I would probably go insane, for being up there, that it just wasn't, I don't think it was a fit for me to be, locked into that kind of format. I mean, I think it takes the right kind of mentality of like, okay, I'm going to do it. But I think for me, doing the same show and doing the same bit parts for, 10 months, I think would drive me insane, which is, I know why a lot of people do kind of other creative things while they're up there and they get into all other things. But yeah, I think it takes the right kind of personality to do that stuff.
Yeah, there was a joke, it's like Ashland is a place where you go to dry out or to become a drunk. Because it was the only game in town, I mean, it was rare that you got, maybe you might be able to go to Portland or go to San Francisco because you had a couple of days off, but it became the be all and end all, it was Brigadoon, you'd go
Right.
up there
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
you're going to be there for a season, and then 10 years go by.
Yeah. Wow.
And you bought a house, and and
Right.
all you talk about. I mean, that's another joke, is that you'd get together for a dinner party and say, okay, we're not going to talk about OSF at all tonight, right? You just howl, because that's all you talked about.
Right.
And people
It was
would
your
come
world.
up to you from the outside world talking about places they were working or things they were doing, and you'd kind of give them the 1,000-yard stare, Yeah, wow. Uh-huh. Because, it was
Yeah.
all so self-contained up
Right.
there,
Sounded like working on the moon or something. Right. Yeah.
And so, there was I can remember being there, because I did 2 long stints. My first stint was, I think, 6 years or 7 years, and I did another 6 years
Wow.
when Ursula and I went back up there,
Yeah.
And so it was 14 seasons altogether, as it turned out.
Yeah, wow.
And I mean, the guaranteed income over a long period of time is very attractive,
Of course,
and I was
yeah.
getting better casting as
Yep.
it went along. But I can remember thinking to myself, particularly in the first stint, when I was in my early 30s, mid 30s, around there, turned 40. Like, if I'm going to go to LA, I better go. If I'm going to want to work in television, I can't
Yep.
stay here.
Right.
There are a couple of this famous Kyle MacLachlan story that he was working in Ashland when he sent a tape to David Lynch, for Dune, and they flew him down there and they did a screen test and he got the part, and he didn't even have an agent. He said,
Wow.
does anybody know anybody that I can maybe represent me? Then Dennis Arndt did, he had a huge film and television career coming out of there, but it was, Gene Smart is another one,
Yeah. Wow.
that was a real rarity.
Right.
People didn't work in television who stayed in Ashland.
Yeah. And Tony would be another kind of anomaly too, that he would.
Well, and Tony, he made that choice though. He had already done Silence of the Lambs, and
right.
he was already an established. He was that guy.
Yeah.
That.
But I would imagine it would take some. I don't know if courage is the right word, but to tell your agents, I'm going to Ashland to do theater for a year, and I'm not doing. That's just it's great that he had that choice, but executed it too.
Yeah, no, Tony could do that because Tony already had established himself as. Tony had that guy status.
Sure. Yeah.
They couldn't name his name, but the audience recognized him. And within the Los Angeles, in the world of Los Angeles, he was an industry name.
Yeah.
He was an industry name on Broadway and New York, and an industry name in LA, and chose to come to Ashland because he wanted to do theater.
Yeah.
And he loved that area. And, so he could fly down to LA, or he could send a tape, for whatever it is. And, he could continue to, and organize a career with, OSF, to shoot things and then come back to Ashland. And so, he had already established a career. Most of the people up in Ashland hadn't established a career,
Right.
A multimedia career.
Sure. You had mentioned that kind of Spider-Man thing of the hang time between buildings. And, jumping forward to kind of the present day, I know the pandemic hit a lot of artists and actors very differently. And so I was curious what, because you were still working very steadily in theater, up through 2019 and all that kind of stuff, and had projects planned for 2020 and maybe even beyond. But what were some of your challenges during the pandemic, during that hang time?
Yeah, I was in rehearsal for the homecoming at North Coast Rep. We were a weekend to rehearsal. We had been talking. It looked like, although I hadn't had the offer yet, but it probably would have. They were at the Globe. They were going to be taping the Shrew, and I know the director, and I talked to her in Chicago about it, and a good chance I was going to play Baptista. I'd had a really good audition with Danny Sullivan for Henry V for the chorus.
in New York?
No, it was going to be at the Globe as well.
Oh,
so
okay.
it would have been those two
Oh,
things.
wow, cool. Yeah.
And, I was actually doing a little more on-camera auditions, through my agents, the great talent agent out of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And it all came to, it's just screeching halt in an instant, all of that. And, it was tough. I mean, because and I knew that it was, that the landscape was going to change dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't know when it was going to open up. Now I'm going to start rehearsals for Homecoming. But, and I mean, thanks to you, I also did some, directed a couple of Shakespeare scenes and acted in one, and I did a one-man Christmas Carol for North Coast Rep, which was fun to do with David. And so that was, it was fun to film that.
Right.
But subsequently, actually, 2001, I haven't worked at all.
Or 2021, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, 2021. Yeah. So, I'm looking forward to this project coming up, but it was daunting. It's also, you reach a certain age and, I know I'm getting older. I had a series of auditions here that I was, maybe have aged out of. I don't know. It could have been maybe, I wasn't any good, but, that was interesting. I'm moving into a different, maybe a different slot, but, I mean, I suppose that's, friends of mine that have, we're all of an age and all came up at the same time and all worked in regional theater through the course of our careers for the most part, with some television and some film stuff, but certainly not famous. And we talk about, how long do you think you're going to be chasing this? How long do you want to be doing this? And I say, I mean, well, until I can't do it anymore. Really. I mean, I still get excited by the challenge of figuring it out, of putting it together, of like, what is happening with this guy? What's the arc? What's the journey? And how do we orchestrate that? So as long as I can still do it and I can, remember the lines and all that stuff, I will. So, my vision of the future coming out of the pandemic is very positive.
Okay, so yeah, you're in the place of potentially viewing, that there is a next phase of your career and not only types of character roles, but what you're doing. And it seems like that's all kind of, you're in the process of figuring all that out now, of like, what is the next phase of your career going to look like, not only in terms of what you're playing, but what you're doing, but the intention, the desire is still there, just to keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, my intention is, as I hear more about what theaters are opening up and what seasons are being chosen, is to put feelers out. Sure. I've contacted Brian Bond at Utah Shakes and, they're doing The Tempest and Lear. And I said, those are two that are on my list, pal.
Right.
Right.
And you've already played Gloucester, right?
I've played Gloucester, and so I'm not getting any younger. So this might be the season, so whatever I may think about my career being over, or, when I, in my darker moments, when I, going like, oh, geez, it's probably, this is it, well, I wouldn't be reaching out if I wasn't interested in, continuing to pursue. So.
Right. Well, and I know you and I have had other conversations about just the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of, for lack of a better term, thing that we're all becoming much more aware of on the theatrical landscape, and just like your place as an artist, and as specifically as a white artist, going, okay, where do I fit in, in this new landscape? Not saying that there isn't a spot for you, but just that we're all becoming more aware of all the other artists out there.
Yeah. And I absolutely support, the change in aesthetic in the landscape and the opening up of opportunities for people of color in every way, in every capacity. And I do think, well, I have been the beneficiary of that kind of privilege in my career, being, having the skin color that I have. And I'm of an age now where, if I give up or I lose something to somebody of color, I'm okay with that. I support it.
Mm-hmm.
It may limit my, casting possibilities over, as in the latter part of my career, but so be it. It's been a long time coming. So there's that. I also, I'm interested in directing as well.
Yeah.
So, the Donald Margulies piece that I remember seeing in New York years ago called Found a Peanut, which is about a group of kids in a project in Brooklyn, and they find some money. It's in 1963. But I remember Robert Joy was the central character as an 8-year-old. Peter McNichol was a 5-year-old, Little Earl.
Okay, yeah.
And Evan Handler was in the cast. And, it was really, it's actually quite a profound piece about how they find money and what it does to as an allegory.
Right.
To their friendships and how it tests them. And the cool thing about it is it's adults that actually play kids. They're not playing at being kids. You have to really get them, really explore the idea of being kids, So the casting requirements are very kind of challenging. Yeah. But I'm interested in doing that because I remember being quite moved by it. And so.
Yeah, well, I mean that sounds like a really unique challenge, and I hope you get to do it, in the near future.
Me too.
I remember you said there was a quote from Hamlet that you kind of think of often, that comes to mind often. Which quote was that?
I got to bring it up.
Oh, okay.
Hold on a second. All right,
I'll cut this.
Let me get it.
And I was just curious, more like how you interpret it in terms of a quote to live by, more than necessarily like how you would work on it as an actor.
Yeah, I think about it, it's an adage that I need to remind myself about sometimes, because as one does, is that they sometimes can get caught up in the past too much, that can lead to, sentiments of regret, or, around you in your circumstances. And, to try and live in the present. Which is what you want to do, interestingly enough, when you're acting, so that you're in the present. And, it's funny because whenever anybody goes up, it's usually because they're thinking too far ahead.
Right.
They'll jump to a line and then they'll come back to, try and come back to the line that they're actually supposed to speak. And, then you're up,
Do you have the quote in front of you? I think it's Act 5, Scene 2.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Not a wit I defy augury. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is.
Well, yeah. So if you don't mind just reading the quote
yeah, sure. I mean, it encapsulates, the idea of carpe diem, and also to stay in the moment, and not a wit. We defy augury. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. Be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he leaves knows what is to leave betimes. Let be. It's just the readiness is all. It's like sort of like, recently I've heard somebody say that when you look around your house and you see what's there, ask yourself the question, if you die tomorrow, would you want a relative to have to clean this up, to have to deal with this?
Yeah.
And there's something to that. It's like, what is the priority? What is,
right.
Are you, for whatever that might be, I mean, the readiness is all can apply to so many things,
It's funny. I don't have kids, but I just kind of immediately got this image in my head of like That sounds like a good family call. Like when we're all trying to go out the door, like, the readiness is all. Like, like if you're in the car, you're in the car. If you're not, you're not.
Yeah,
like
that's right. That's right. You can't be kind of ready.
Yeah.
You can't
well,
be,
I'm just gonna.
I'm
Yeah.
almost ready. Well, no,
Yeah.
the readiness is all.
Yeah.
When you're ready,
you're
ready.
jacket. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, are you prepared for this audition?
Right.
Are you really prepared? Are you ready?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's that like, well, I kind of sort of know the lines. It's like, no, either you know them or you don't.
Or you don't. Are you ready for this rehearsal? Did you prepare for this? Do you know, are you coming into this rehearsal with a point of view? Ready to work? Or are you going to kind of fake it, and fudge it, or let somebody else, lead you, I mean, having a point of view has everything to do with the readiness.
Right.
And the readiness in this business is all. In theater or film or television, it's like you can't go into a network audition, when you go in and meet network, you better be ready.
Yeah. Jamie, this was great. I really, really appreciate all your time, man. And maybe someday, we can play some tennis and you can just whip me around the court,
Well, I don't know.
Try to teach me a thing or two.
Yeah, I'd love to. I didn't know you were a tennis player. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, I played in high school, and I've been trying to dust off the cobwebs and shake out the rust a little bit. And some things are coming back, but your body's like, hey, you're not in high school anymore. I don't want to shock you, but but it's okay. It's coming back. I feel like I'm learning to be a smarter player, where it's like, just get the ball back.
It's
make
not
the
about
other guy
power.
make a mistake.
That's right.
Yeah,
set up a point and let them make the mistake. If you get the ball back, then it's up to them.
Right. I mean, I can still hit hard, but it's like, right. It's that more just, if it's a rally of 8 points and you can hit it back 7 times, but they can only hit it back 6, you win, like that's it.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
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 Oh, cool. Well, I will attempt to be ready for all if and when we play tennis.
Well, I would love to. I'd love to play. I really, I play like 3 times a week. So.
Oh man. Oh yeah. You're really going to mop the court.
No,
right.
Man. You've got like at least 20 years on me or more. 30 years on me.
I've been playing some guys like literally in their upper 70s. One guy's 80. And I don't know how they do it. They get everything back to me. So they're even more consistent than I am. And they have me running all over the court. And of course, I sometimes feel bad of like making them run all over the court because I'm like, I don't want to hurt them. But they're like, no, bring it on. But they're like, they're giving me a good run for my money. So, well, age doesn't have anything to do with it necessarily. So.
All right.
But anyway, it was great chatting with you. I really appreciate it, man.
I do too, man.
Hey there, this is Nathan one more time. Thanks so much for checking out the episode today. Please remember to subscribe so you don't miss anything ahead. If you enjoy what you've heard, please let others know. Write a review, post on social media, send an email, tell your entire acting class, or just a friend. I sincerely appreciate it. You can tag us at WAJ Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. Be sure to check out workingactorsjourney.com for our show notes with additional info and links mentioned in this episode, as well as all the episodes. We've got 25 plus interviews and 12 plus workshop presentations. Sign up for the email list so you're the first to hear about upcoming projects, workshops, and much, much more. Thanks again to today's guest and to everyone that makes these episodes possible. And a special thanks to you for listening. I'm Nathan Egan, and enjoy the journey.